I clutched my phone tighter, watching the departure board flip to delayed for the 4th time in 2 hours. My connecting flight to San Francisco had been pushed back indefinitely due to a storm system that seemed determined to keep me stranded at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. The terminal was nearly empty now, just past midnight, with only a few scattered travelers sprawled across uncomfortable metal chairs, and the distant hum of cleaning crews echoing through the corridors. My stomach growled audibly, reminding me that the stale granola bar from the vending machine hours ago hadn't been nearly enough. The few restaurants still open were overpriced and uninviting, their fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on tired faces. I'd spent the last of my cash on that granola bar, and my credit card was maxed out from the unexpected business trip expenses my company hadn't yet reimbursed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a marketing consultant who'd just closed a major deal for a luxury hotel chain, and I couldn't afford a decent meal or a hotel room for the night. My client had been thrilled with the campaign proposal, but my commission wouldn't hit my account for another week. The celebration dinner they'd insisted on buying had been the highlight of my month, and now I was back to counting pennies. I pulled my thin cardigan tighter around my shoulders, the airport's aggressive air conditioning making me shiver. My professional blazer was packed away in my carry-on, and the silk blouse that had made me feel confident during my presentation now felt inadequate against the terminal's perpetual chill. The hard plastic chair was doing nothing for my back, which had been aching since the turbulent flight from Boston. A security guard walked past, his footsteps echoing off the polished floors. He glanced at me with mild curiosity before continuing his rounds. I probably looked like exactly what I was, a stranded passenger with nowhere else to go. My reflection in the dark window showed disheveled brown hair escaping from what had been a neat bun this morning, tired green eyes, and the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. The departure board flickered again. Still delayed. I closed my eyes and tried to calculate my options. The airport hotels were booked solid due to the storm, and even if they weren't, I couldn't afford them. My apartment in San Francisco felt like it was on another planet. My boss would understand if I missed tomorrow morning's team meeting, but the client presentation on Wednesday was non-negotiable. Everything depended on this deal going through. The sound of expensive shoes on marble made me look up. A man was walking toward the gate area, moving with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he owned whatever space he occupied. Even in the harsh terminal lighting, he was striking. Tall and lean, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it, wearing a charcoal suit that had definitely not come off any rack. His white shirt was open at the collar, no tie, giving him an air of casual authority that was somehow more intimidating than formal business attire would have been. He was carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and talking quietly into a phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, the words indistinct, but there was something commanding about his tone that made the few remaining passengers glance in his direction. As he got closer, I caught fragments of his conversation. Something about the Chicago situation and making sure the family understands. His accent was educated, East Coast, with just a hint of something else underneath. Italian, maybe. He ended his call and looked around the nearly empty gate area, his dark eyes scanning the space with the kind of attention that suggested he was accustomed to assessing potential threats. When his gaze landed on me, I felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. Not fear, exactly, but recognition of something dangerous. Our eyes met for a moment across the empty seats. His expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity there that made my breath catch. Then he looked away, settling into a chair several rows ahead of me, and pulled out what looked like a tablet. I tried to focus on my own phone, scrolling through emails I'd already read 3 times, but I found myself stealing glances at him. There was something magnetic about his presence, the way he seemed completely at ease despite the chaos of delayed flights and stranded passengers. When he spoke quietly into his phone again, I caught myself straining to hear his voice. The terminal lights flickered, and an announcement crackled over the intercom about the storm system intensifying. More delays were expected. I groaned softly and let my head fall back against the uncomfortable chair. Rough night? The voice was closer than I'd expected. I opened my eyes to find him standing a few feet away, having moved from his original seat without me noticing. Up close, he was even more imposing. Not just his height, though he was easily 6 feet tall, but something in his bearing that suggested he was used to being obeyed. You could say that, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. My connecting flight has been delayed so many times I'm starting to think it's fictional. He smiled, and the expression transformed his face completely. The dangerous edge was still there, but now it was tempered with genuine warmth. San Francisco? How did you know? Process of elimination. It's the only West Coast departure left on the board. He gestured toward the display with one elegant hand. And you have that look of someone who's supposed to be somewhere important tomorrow. I laughed despite myself. That obvious? The professional attire, the laptop bag, the way you keep checking your phone. His eyes took in the details with an efficiency that was both impressive and slightly unnerving. Plus, you're the only person in this terminal who looks like they're mentally calculating the cost of missing a business meeting. Guilty as charged. I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of how rumpled I must look. What about you? Let me guess. New York? Eventually. He checked an expensive-looking watch. But my plans are a bit more flexible than yours appear to be. There was something in the way he said it that suggested his flexibility came from a position of power rather than lack of responsibility. This was someone who made his own schedule, not someone at the mercy of other people's decisions. I'm Gideon, he said, extending his hand. Grace. His handshake was firm, confident, and lasted just a beat longer than strictly necessary. His skin was warm, calloused in unexpected places that suggested he was more than just another businessman. Well, Grace, it looks like we're going to be here for a while. He glanced around the empty terminal. Have you eaten anything that wasn't dispensed from a machine in the last 6 hours? I felt heat rise to my cheeks. The dining options are somewhat limited at this hour. He studied my face for a moment, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that he was reading more than I intended to reveal. There's a private lounge on the upper level that serves decent food. Would you like to join me? Every instinct I had should have been screaming warnings. I knew nothing about this man except his first name and his obvious wealth. But there was something about his manner, a courteous formality that felt old-fashioned and oddly reassuring, that made me consider his offer. I appreciate the invitation, but I should probably stay near my gate in case there are any updates. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call, speaking in rapid Italian. The conversation was brief, and when he hung up, he was smiling again. Your flight has been canceled, he said matter-of-factly. The storm isn't clearing until late tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. The airline will be making an announcement in about 10 minutes. I stared at him. How could you possibly know that? I have good sources. He slipped his phone back into his jacket pocket. So, about that dinner invitation? As if on cue, the intercom crackled to life. The gate agent's tired voice confirmed exactly what Gideon had just told me. Flight canceled. Rebooking available for the following evening. Passengers advised to seek accommodation for the night. I looked up at him with a mixture of amazement and suspicion. Okay. That was either incredibly lucky timing, or you have some very interesting connections. Let's go with lucky timing, he said. But there was something in his eyes that suggested it wasn't luck at all. So, dinner? My stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, settling the matter for me. I suppose I don't have many other options. Excellent. He picked up my carry-on bag without asking, lifting it as if it weighed nothing. The lounge is much more comfortable than these chairs, and they have a chef who actually knows what he's doing. As we walked toward the escalators, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing some kind of threshold. The rational part of my mind cataloged all the reasons this was a bad idea. Strange man, empty airport, mysterious phone calls, and the way he seemed to know things he shouldn't. But there was another part of me, a part I didn't often listen to, that was drawn to the confidence he radiated, and the promise of a night that would be anything but ordinary. The private lounge was indeed on the upper level, behind frosted glass doors that required a keycard to open. The space was warm and elegant, with leather seating, soft lighting, and the kind of understated luxury that spoke of serious money. A handful of other travelers were scattered throughout the room, most of them on phones or laptops, all of them looking like they belonged in this rarefied environment. Gideon led me to a quiet corner with a view of the runway, where we could watch the storm lashing the aircraft outside. A server appeared almost immediately, as if he'd been expecting us. Good evening, Mr. Castellano. the man said with the kind of deference usually reserved for celebrities or heads of state. Your usual table? Castellano, so that was his last name. And apparently, he was a regular here, which explained the keycard access and the server's immediate attention. This is fine, Marcus, Gideon replied, settling into the chair across from me. Could you bring us the dinner menu? And perhaps a bottle of the Barolo? Of course, sir. Right away. I watched this exchange with growing curiosity. You come here often? I travel frequently for business, he said, which wasn't really an answer. And you? What brings you to Chicago besides canceled flights? Work. I'm a marketing consultant, specializing in hospitality and luxury brands. I accepted the wine menu Marcus offered, though the prices made me slightly dizzy. I just finished a project for a hotel chain that's expanding into the West Coast market. Successful? I think so. They seemed pleased with the campaign strategy. I set the menu aside. What about you? What kind of business keeps you traveling at all hours? Something flickered across his expression, too quick to interpret. Import and export, primarily. My family has interests in various industries. It was a vague answer, the kind that invited more questions while simultaneously discouraging them. I found myself studying his face, looking for clues about what he wasn't saying. There were small details I was beginning to notice. The way his eyes never stopped moving, constantly scanning the room. The careful way he positioned himself with his back to the wall, and a clear view of all entrances. The expensive watch that looked more tactical than decorative. The wine arrived, and Gideon handled the tasting ritual with the ease of someone who'd done it countless times. When Marcus poured our glasses, the server's hands were steady despite the obvious respect he held for our table's primary occupant. Tell me about this hotel project, Gideon said, settling back in his chair. What makes a successful marketing campaign in the luxury hospitality industry? It was safer ground, and I found myself relaxing as I explained the challenges of positioning a new brand in an established market. He asked intelligent questions, demonstrating knowledge of business strategy that went deeper than casual interest. This wasn't polite small talk. He was genuinely engaged in the conversation. The key is understanding that luxury consumers aren't just buying a service, I concluded, taking a sip of wine that was probably worth more than I wanted to think about. They're buying an experience, a story they can tell about themselves. And what story were you helping them tell? Exclusivity without pretension. Sophistication that feels effortless. I gestured with my wine glass, feeling more animated than I had all day. The idea that true luxury is about having choices, not showing off wealth. He nodded thoughtfully. An interesting philosophy. Most people in your position would focus on status and material displays. Those campaigns work for some demographics, but they're not sustainable. The most successful luxury brands understand that their real product is making customers feel special, not making them look rich. You sound like you speak from experience. There was something in his tone that made me pause. I've done my research, if that's what you mean. I suspect you've done more than research. His dark eyes studied my face with an intensity that made me self-conscious. You have the bearing of someone who understands luxury from the inside, not just as an observer. I felt my cheeks warm. He wasn't wrong, exactly. I had grown up in comfortable circumstances, though nothing compared to the world he obviously inhabited. But that life felt like a different person now. Someone I'd been before my father's business failed, and my family lost everything when I was in college. I understand my target market, I said carefully. That's what makes me good at my job. He seemed to sense that he'd touched on something sensitive, because he smiled and changed the subject. Well, their choice in consultants was clearly excellent. You have a gift for making complex ideas sound simple. The conversation flowed more easily after that, moving from business to travel to books and films. Gideon was well-read and articulate, with opinions on everything from Italian cinema to the impact of technology on traditional industries. He was also charming in a way that felt effortless, never pushing too hard or trying to impress, just genuinely interested in what I had to say. By the time our meals arrived, expertly prepared dishes that had no business existing in an airport lounge, I had almost forgotten about my canceled flight and the complications it would create. The wine had helped, but it was more than that. For the first time in months, I was having an actual conversation with someone who challenged me intellectually and seemed to appreciate my thoughts. "So," I said, cutting into what might have been the best salmon I'd ever tasted, "what's your story? Family business, you mentioned?" Again, that flicker of something across his expression. "My father started the company when he immigrated here from Italy. Import and export, like I said. It's grown considerably over the years." "Are you taking over from him?" "Eventually." He took a sip of wine, and I noticed his knuckles showed small scars that seemed inconsistent with a life spent in boardrooms, though I sometimes wonder if I'm cut out for the family business. There was something almost vulnerable in the admission, a crack in the polished exterior he'd maintained all evening. It made him seem more human, more accessible. "What would you do instead?" I asked softly. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the storm beyond the windows. "I've always been interested in legitimate businesses, sustainable enterprises that create value rather than just extracting it." It was an odd way to phrase it, the emphasis on legitimate standing out like a red flag. But before I could analyze it further, he was smiling again, the moment of transparency closed. "But enough about me," he said. "Tell me about San Francisco. Do you like living there?" We talked until the lounge began to empty, other travelers heading to their respective accommodations for the night. I found myself reluctant to end the conversation, though I couldn't quite identify why. Gideon was obviously wealthy and sophisticated, probably out of my league in every measurable way, but there was something about him that drew me in despite my better judgment. "I should probably figure out where I'm staying tonight," I said finally, glancing at my phone. It was nearly 3 a.m, and the storm showed no signs of abating. "The airport hotels are fully booked," Gideon said, signaling for the check. "I checked while you were in the restroom." My heart sank. I'd been hoping against hope that something would open up. "I guess I'll be spending the night in the terminal after all." "Actually," he said, his tone carefully casual, "I have a suite at the Palmer House downtown. It has a separate living area with a comfortable sofa. You're welcome to stay there if you'd prefer not to sleep in a plastic chair." I stared at him. The offer was generous, but also potentially dangerous. I barely knew this man, despite having spent the last several hours talking with him. "That's very kind," I said slowly, "but I couldn't impose like that." "It's not an imposition." His expression was serious now, businesslike. "The suite has a separate entrance to the living area, and I'll be working most of the night anyway. You'd be doing me a favor by making sure the space doesn't go completely unused." I wanted to say yes. The thought of trying to sleep in the airport terminal was genuinely depressing, and something about Gideon's manner suggested he was trustworthy, despite the mysterious edges to his story. "I'd pay for my portion," I said finally. "I insist." He waved a hand dismissively. "The room is already paid for. Consider it a gesture between stranded travelers." Before I could protest further, he stood and pulled out his phone. "I'll have my driver meet us downstairs." His driver. Of course he had a driver. As we gathered our things and prepared to leave the lounge, I caught my reflection in the dark window again. I looked different somehow, more alive than I had in months. Whether it was the wine, the unexpected adventure, or the magnetic pull of the man beside me, something had shifted in the course of this strange night. Walking toward the elevators, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to cross another threshold, one that would be much harder to cross back over. But with my flight canceled and no other realistic options, I followed Gideon Castellano into the night, unaware that I was walking directly into a world where nothing would ever be simple again. The Palmer House lobby was exactly what I expected from one of Chicago's legendary hotels: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of understated elegance that whispered rather than shouted its luxury. Even at nearly 4 a.m, the space was softly lit and impeccably maintained, with staff moving quietly through their duties. Gideon moved through the lobby like he owned it, which for all I knew, he might have. The desk clerk nodded respectfully as we passed, and I noticed how the few other guests in the space seemed to give him a wider berth, as if instinctively recognizing someone who commanded respect. The elevator ride to the 20th floor was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Gideon stood beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne again, something subtle and expensive that made me want to lean closer. The thought surprised me. I wasn't normally attracted to obviously wealthy men. In my experience, they tended to be either entitled or trying too hard to impress. Gideon was neither, which made him infinitely more dangerous to my peace of mind. The suite was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, the storm clouds creating dramatic shadows against the city lights. The living area was spacious and elegant, with a comfortable sofa that would definitely be preferable to airport seating. "The bedroom is through there," Gideon said, gesturing toward a set of double doors. "I'll be working out here, so please make yourself comfortable." I set my carry-on bag beside the sofa and turned to thank him, but he was already moving toward a desk where he'd placed his briefcase and laptop. The transformation was immediate and striking. Gone was the charming dinner companion, replaced by someone who radiated focused intensity as he opened files and began making quiet phone calls. Even his posture was different, straighter, and more commanding. I caught fragments of his conversations, all in Italian, and though I couldn't understand the words, the tone was clearly business. Serious business. I made myself as small as possible on the sofa, not wanting to intrude on what were obviously private matters. But I couldn't help noticing details that raised more questions than they answered. The way he spoke with absolute authority, giving what sounded like orders rather than suggestions. The expensive laptop that looked more like military equipment than standard business technology. The way he checked his watch frequently, as if coordinating activities across multiple time zones. Around 5:30, exhaustion finally overtook curiosity, and I dozed off on the sofa, despite my best efforts to stay alert. The last thing I remembered was the low murmur of Gideon's voice, now speaking English, saying something about making sure the message was clear. I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee. For a moment, I was disoriented. The elegant suite so different from my usual surroundings that it took several seconds to remember where I was and how I'd gotten there. Gideon was standing by the windows, fully dressed in a fresh suit, talking quietly into his phone. He looked like he'd been awake for hours, completely alert and focused. When he noticed I was awake, he ended his call and turned toward me with that same charming smile from the night before. "Good morning," he said, moving to pour coffee from a silver service that definitely hadn't been there when I fell asleep. "I hope you slept well." "Much better than I would have in the airport," I admitted, sitting up and trying to smooth my wrinkled blouse. "Thank you again for this. You really didn't have to. It was my pleasure." He handed me a cup of coffee, perfectly prepared with cream and sugar, though I didn't remember mentioning how I liked it. I took the liberty of having some clothes sent up. They should fit you. I followed his gaze to see several shopping bags placed discreetly near the bedroom doors, designer labels that I recognized but couldn't afford. "Gideon, I can't accept. You have meetings tomorrow," he said matter-of-factly. "You'll want to look professional. Consider it a loan if it makes you more comfortable." Before I could protest further, his phone rang again. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I need to take this," he said, moving toward the windows. "Please, make yourself at home." The conversation that followed was in Italian again, but there was something different about his tone this time. Sharper, with an edge that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't understand the words, but the conversation sounded like the kind you didn't want to be on the wrong side of. I took the opportunity to explore the shopping bags, finding clothes that were not only in my exact size but perfectly suited to my style. A sophisticated black dress that would work for business meetings, a silk blouse, even undergarments and shoes that fit perfectly. The level of attention to detail was both impressive and unsettling. How had he known my size so precisely? I tried to remember if I'd mentioned any specifics about my measurements, but came up empty. Either he was incredibly observant, or he had resources that went beyond normal business connections. When he finished his call, Gideon's demeanor had shifted again. He was still polite and charming, but there was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there the night before. "Everything all right?" I asked carefully. "Business complications," he said with a dismissive wave. "Nothing that can't be handled. Are you hungry?" "I've arranged for breakfast to be sent up. As if on cue, there was a soft knock at the door. Gideon opened it to admit a hotel staff member wheeling in an elaborate breakfast service. Fresh fruit, pastries, eggs prepared exactly how I liked them. Though again, I couldn't remember specifying my preferences. "You're very thorough," I observed, watching him pour fresh orange juice into crystal glasses. "I believe in taking care of details," he replied. "It's how successful business gets done." The breakfast was delicious, but I found myself studying Gideon more carefully than I had the night before. In daylight, I could see things I'd missed in the soft lighting of the lounge. The expensive watch was definitely more tactical than decorative, with features that looked more suited to military operations than business meetings. His suit, while impeccably tailored, was cut to accommodate something at his waistline that created a subtle bulge under his jacket. Most telling were his hands. I'd noticed the calluses the night before, but now I could see small scars across his knuckles, the kind that came from physical altercations rather than sporting activities. These weren't the soft hands of someone who'd spent his life in boardrooms. "Tell me more about your family business," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "Import and export covers a lot of territory." "We specialize in items that require discretion," he said, which was both an answer and not an answer at all. "Luxury goods, primarily. Things that certain people prefer to acquire through private channels rather than conventional retail." It sounded legitimate enough, but there was something in the way he said it that suggested layers I wasn't seeing. Before I could probe further, his phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. "I am afraid I need to step out for a few hours," he said, standing and reaching for his jacket. "Business that requires my personal attention. You're welcome to stay here, of course. The room is yours until your flight this evening." "I should probably head back to the airport," I said, though the thought of spending the day in the terminal wasn't appealing. "I need to confirm my rebooking and—" "Already taken care of." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and handed it to me. "Your flight is confirmed for 6:30 this evening, first class. A car will pick you up here at 4. I stared at the boarding pass, which was indeed first class and in my name. "How did you—" "I have a good travel agent," he said. But his smile didn't quite reach his eyes this time. "Grace, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." The sudden seriousness in his tone made my pulse quicken. "Okay. Is there anyone in San Francisco who's expecting you today? Anyone who would be concerned if you didn't arrive as scheduled?" The question was odd, phrased like someone assessing vulnerabilities rather than making polite conversation. "My boss knows my flight was canceled." "Why?" "Just want to make sure you won't be missed if your return is delayed." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Grace, I want you to promise me something. Don't leave this room until the car arrives. Don't answer the door for anyone except hotel staff, and only if they announce themselves and show identification." Fear spiked through me. "Gideon, what's going on?" "Probably nothing," he said. But the careful way he was watching my reaction suggested otherwise. "I'm just a cautious person by nature. Promise me." The intensity in his voice made it clear this wasn't a request. "I promise." He nodded, satisfied. "I'll be back before you need to leave for the airport. If anything unusual happens, anything at all, call this number." He handed me a business card with only a phone number printed on expensive paper. "They'll know how to reach me." After he left, the suite felt different. Larger and more isolated, with silence that seemed to press against the windows. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that Gideon was simply a careful businessman who'd been kind to a stranded traveler. But the warnings, the precise knowledge of my schedule, the expensive clothes that fit too perfectly, all of it pointed to something more complex than chance encounter. I spent the morning exploring the clothes he'd provided, taking a shower in the marble bathroom that was larger than my entire kitchen at home, and trying to make sense of what had happened in the last 12 hours. The reflection looking back at me from the mirror showed someone who looked rested and elegant, wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly salary. But there was something in my eyes that hadn't been there yesterday, a wariness that came from recognizing I was in deeper water than I'd realized. Around noon, room service arrived with lunch I hadn't ordered, accompanied by a bottle of wine and a note written in Gideon's careful handwriting. Thought you might be hungry. Back soon. G. The meal was perfect, tailored to preferences I was certain I'd never expressed. It was becoming clear that Gideon Castellano knew far more about me than our brief conversation could have revealed. As I ate, I found myself reviewing every detail of our interaction, looking for clues I'd missed. The way other people in the lounge had given him space, the immediate deference from hotel staff, the phone calls in Italian, the tactical watch and hidden weapon. The pieces were forming a picture I didn't want to acknowledge. By 2:00, I was pacing the suite, my nerves stretched thin by questions that had no good answers. When my phone rang, I nearly jumped out of my skin. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. Grace? The voice was female, professional. This is Elena from Mr. Castellano's office. He asked me to confirm that you're comfortable and have everything you need. I'm fine, I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. When will he be back? He's running slightly behind schedule, but he wanted me to assure you that your transportation to the airport is confirmed for 4:00. After she hung up, I stared at my phone, wondering how Gideon's office had gotten my number. I was certain I hadn't given it to him, which meant he'd obtained it through other means. The realization that I was being monitored, managed, and moved like a piece on a chessboard was both thrilling and terrifying. Whatever Gideon Castellano was involved in, it was far more complex than import and export of luxury goods. When 3:30 arrived with no sign of his return, I began to seriously consider my options. The clothes he'd provided fit perfectly and were worth more than I made in a month. The first-class ticket to San Francisco represented a significant expense. The suite, the meals, the car service, all of it added up to thousands of dollars spent on someone he'd known for less than 24 hours. No one did that for a stranger, which meant either Gideon wasn't who he claimed to be, or I wasn't as much of a stranger as I'd thought. At exactly 4:00, there was a soft knock at the door. I looked through the peephole to see a man in a dark suit, the kind of person who screamed professional security. Ms. Harper? His voice was respectful but firm. I'm here to take you to the airport. I gathered my things, including the designer clothes I couldn't afford to leave behind, and opened the door. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with the bearing of someone who was used to handling difficult situations. Mr. Castellano sends his apologies, he said, as we walked toward the elevator. He was detained in meetings but wanted to ensure you didn't miss your flight. The ride to the airport was smooth and silent, the driver navigating Chicago traffic with professional efficiency. I sat in the back seat, watching the city pass by, and tried to process everything that had happened. When we arrived at O'Hare, the driver walked me to the first-class check-in counter, where my boarding pass was waiting exactly as promised. The airline staff treated me with the kind of deference usually reserved for their most valuable customers. Have a pleasant flight, Ms. Harper, the driver said, tipping his hat before disappearing back into the crowd. As I made my way through security and toward my gate, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not paranoid watching, but the kind of professional surveillance that came from people who were very good at staying invisible. The first-class lounge was elegant and comfortable, but I found myself studying every other passenger, looking for signs that they were more than they appeared to be. By the time boarding began, I was wound so tight I could barely sit still. The flight itself was uneventful, the first-class service impeccable. But as we descended toward San Francisco, I realized that whatever had started in that airport terminal the night before was far from over. Gideon Castellano had entered my life like a storm, leaving behind expensive gifts and dangerous questions. And despite every rational instinct telling me to forget about him and return to my normal life, I couldn't stop thinking about the intensity in his dark eyes when he'd made me promise to stay safe. As the plane touched down at SFO, I pulled out the business card he'd given me, with nothing but a phone number printed on expensive paper. In my other hand, I held my phone with his assistant's number still in the call log. Whatever game I'd stumbled into, it was far from over. And despite my fear, I wasn't sure I wanted it to be. 3 days passed in San Francisco with no word from Gideon, and I almost convinced myself that our encounter had been exactly what it appeared. A chance meeting between stranded travelers that had ended when our flights resumed. Almost. The designer clothes hanging in my closet argued otherwise, The memory of his assistant calling my personal phone number was harder to dismiss. And the business card, with just a phone number, tucked into my wallet like a secret, felt heavier each time I saw it. I threw myself into work, preparing for the follow-up presentation with the hotel chain. The client was thrilled with the initial campaign proposal, and we were moving into the implementation phase. It should have been the highlight of my career, but I found myself distracted by thoughts of storm gray eyes and dangerous smiles. On Thursday evening, I was working late in my small apartment, reviewing market analysis reports and refining budget projections, when my phone rang. The number was blocked, but something made me answer anyway. Grace. His voice was instantly recognizable, that low, commanding tone that seemed to reach through the phone and wrap around me. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Gideon. My heart rate spiked, and I found myself gripping the phone tighter. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about me. Never. There was something in his voice, a warmth that contrasted sharply with the careful control he'd maintained in Chicago. I've been thinking about you constantly, actually. How was your flight? Comfortable. Thank you again for the upgrade. I closed my laptop and moved to the window, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. Though I have to ask how you managed to arrange it so quickly. I told you I have a good travel agent. His laugh was soft, intimate. Grace, I need to see you again. The directness of the statement caught me off guard. You're in San Francisco. I will be tomorrow. I have business there, and I was hoping you might have dinner with me. I should have said no. Every rational part of my mind was screaming that getting involved with Gideon Castellano was dangerous territory. But the memory of our conversation in the airport lounge, the way he'd listened to me like my thoughts actually mattered, was stronger than my reservations. I'd like that, I heard myself saying. Excellent. I'll pick you up at 7. You don't know my address. I'll find you, he said, and something in his tone suggested it wouldn't be difficult for him to do exactly that. After he hung up, I sat staring at my phone for several minutes, wondering what I was getting myself into. The smart thing would be to call him back and cancel, to return to my normal life of work deadlines and predictable routines. But intelligence had never been my strong suit when it came to men who made my pulse race. The next evening, I spent an embarrassing amount of time getting ready, trying on 3 different outfits before settling on the black dress Gideon had provided in Chicago. It fit perfectly, and made me feel sophisticated in a way that my usual professional wardrobe couldn't match. At exactly 7 o'clock, there was a soft knock at my door. I looked through the peephole to see Gideon standing in the hallway, looking devastatingly handsome in a navy suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. His dark hair was styled perfectly, and he was holding a single white orchid, elegant and unusual. You look beautiful, he said when I opened the door, his eyes taking in the dress with obvious appreciation. I'm glad to see it fits well. About that, I said, accepting the orchid. I really should pay you back for all the clothes. They must have cost... Grace. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne again. We've already discussed this. Consider them a gift between friends. Friends. The word hung between us, inadequate for whatever was developing between us, but safer than the alternatives. The car waiting downstairs was even more impressive than the airport service in Chicago. A sleek black sedan with tinted windows, and a driver who looked more like security than transportation. As we settled into the leather seats, I noticed Gideon checking his phone constantly, his expression growing more tense with each message. Everything all right? I asked as we navigated through downtown traffic. Business complications, he said, the same phrase he'd used in Chicago. Nothing that can't be handled, but it may require my attention later this evening. The restaurant he'd chosen was one of San Francisco's most exclusive establishments, the kind of place that required reservations months in advance and charged more for a single meal than most people spent on groceries in a week. We were seated immediately at a corner table with privacy and an exceptional view of the city lights. You certainly don't do anything halfway, I observed, looking around at the elegant dining room where every other patron radiated wealth and influence. Life's too short for mediocrity, he replied, signaling the sommelier. I believe in experiencing the best of everything. The wine he selected was extraordinary, the kind of bottle that belonged in museums rather than restaurants. As we talked over the first course, I found myself falling back into the easy conversation we'd shared in Chicago. Gideon was an engaging companion, asking thoughtful questions about my work and sharing stories about his travels that painted him as worldly and sophisticated. But I was more observant this time, noticing details that had escaped me before. The way other diners glanced at our table with a mixture of curiosity and wariness, the deference shown by the restaurant staff who treated Gideon like visiting royalty, the careful way he positioned himself to watch the entrance, never fully relaxing despite his charming demeanor. "Tell me about your family," I said during the main course. "You mentioned your father started the business in Italy." Something shifted in his expression, a shadow crossing his features before he controlled it. My father was a complicated man. He came to America with nothing but determination and a willingness to do whatever was necessary to provide for his family. That sounds admirable. Admirable, yes, but also costly. He took a sip of wine, staring out at the city lights. Success in certain industries requires compromises that not everyone can live with. There was pain in his voice, carefully buried, but unmistakable. What kind of compromises? He was quiet for a long moment, and I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "My father built an empire, Grace. But empires aren't built through kindness and fair dealing. They're built through power, control, and the willingness to eliminate obstacles." He met my eyes directly. I inherited that empire, along with all the obligations and enemies that came with it. The admission hung between us like a confession. I felt my throat tighten as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. "What exactly are you telling me, Gideon?" "I'm telling you that I'm not the man you think I am." His expression was unreadable, but his hands were perfectly still on the table, as if he was exercising extreme control. "I'm telling you that the legitimate businesses are only part of what my family controls. And I'm telling you that anyone who becomes close to me inherits dangers they didn't choose." My heart was pounding now, but not entirely from fear. "Are you trying to scare me away?" "I'm trying to be honest with you." He leaned forward slightly, "because despite every rational reason to stay away from you, I can't stop thinking about that night in Chicago. About the way you challenged my assumptions and made me remember who I wanted to be before I became who I had to be." The intensity in his voice made my breath catch. "And who did you want to be?" "Someone who built things instead of taking them. Someone who created value instead of extracting it through fear." His smile was sad, tinged with regret. "Someone who could offer a woman like you a life worth living instead of a beautiful prison." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression hardened immediately. "I'm sorry," he said, standing abruptly. "I need to make a call. This is urgent." He stepped away from the table, moving toward a quiet corner of the restaurant where he could speak privately. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in his posture as he listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. I sat alone at the table, my mind racing. Gideon had essentially just confessed to being involved in organized crime, though he'd been careful not to use those specific words. The careful language, the emphasis on family obligations, the references to enemies and compromises, it all painted a picture that was both thrilling and terrifying. When he returned to the table, his demeanor had changed completely. The charming dinner companion was gone, replaced by someone who radiated cold authority. "We need to leave," he said, throwing several $100 bills on the table without counting them. "Now." "What's wrong?" "I'll explain in the car." His hand found the small of my back, guiding me toward the exit with firm pressure. "Just stay close to me and don't ask questions until we're somewhere private." The ride back through the city was tense and silent. Gideon spent the entire time on his phone, speaking in rapid Italian to what sounded like multiple different people. The driver took a circuitous route, doubling back several times in a way that suggested we were either following someone or making sure we weren't being followed. Instead of taking me home, we ended up at a high-rise building in the financial district. The driver pulled into an underground garage where two other men in dark suits were waiting. "Gideon," I said as we got out of the car, "I think I should go home." "That's not possible right now." His voice was gentle but firm. "Grace, I need you to trust me. There's a situation developing that makes it unsafe for you to be alone tonight." Fear spiked through me. What kind of situation? He guided me toward a private elevator, the two men flanking us like bodyguards. "The kind that comes with my world. I'm sorry you're being pulled into this, but until we resolve it, you're safer with me than anywhere else." The elevator rose smoothly to the top floor, opening into a penthouse that was even more impressive than the hotel suite in Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of San Francisco Bay, and the furnishings were museum quality. But what struck me most was the obvious security infrastructure: cameras, reinforced windows, and technology that looked more suited to a military installation than a residence. "Welcome to my San Francisco home," Gideon said, his tone attempting lightness, but not quite achieving it. "I'm afraid the circumstances aren't ideal, but you'll be comfortable here. How long are we talking about?" "A few days, possibly a week." He moved to a wall of monitors that showed various camera feeds around the building. "I have people working to resolve the situation, but these things take time." I sank onto a leather sofa that probably cost more than my car. "Gideon, I have a life. I have work obligations, meetings, responsibilities." "Already handled." He didn't look up from the monitors. "Your boss received a call this afternoon informing him that you've been selected for an exclusive consulting opportunity that requires immediate travel. Your calendar has been cleared." The casual way he announced that he'd taken control of my professional life sent a chill down my spine. "You can't just rearrange my life without asking." "I can, and I have." Now he did look at me, his expression serious. "Grace, there are people who want to hurt me, and they've identified you as a potential weakness. Until I eliminate that threat, you're not safe on your own." "A weakness?" "Someone I care about." His voice softened. "Someone whose safety matters to me more than it should, given how recently we've met." The admission should have been romantic, but in the context of everything else, it felt more like a claim of ownership. "So what am I now? Your prisoner?" "You're my guest," he corrected. "Free to move about this apartment, access to anything you need. The only restriction is that you can't leave until I'm certain you're not in danger." I stood up, pacing to the windows. The view was breathtaking, but all I could think about was how high up we were, how isolated from the world below. "And if I refuse? If I insist on going home?" His reflection appeared in the glass beside mine. "Then you'd be making a mistake that could cost both of us everything." The quiet certainty in his voice made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. Whatever had started as a chance encounter in an airport had become something much more complex and dangerous. "I need to know the truth," I said, turning to face him. "All of it. If I'm going to be trapped here, I deserve to understand why." Gideon studied my face for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he nodded. "My family controls certain territories in New York, Chicago, and now San Francisco," he began, his voice matter-of-fact. "We provide services that other organizations can't or won't provide. Protection, dispute resolution, access to restricted markets. You're talking about the Mafia." "I'm talking about business." His expression hardened. "Legal business, mostly. But yes, some of our operations exist in gray areas that law enforcement doesn't appreciate." "And the threat to me?" "There's a rival family trying to expand into our West Coast operations. They've been applying pressure, testing our defenses." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "Yesterday they demonstrated that they know about you, know about our connection. That makes you a target." The reality of what he was saying hit me like a physical blow. "Because of one dinner? One night in Chicago?" "Because of what you represent to me." His hand reached up to touch my face, his fingers gentle against my cheek. "Because anyone watching can see that you matter to me in a way that makes you valuable leverage." I should have been terrified. Part of me was. But there was another part. A part I didn't want to acknowledge, that was thrilled by the intensity of his attention, and the suggestion that I'd become important to someone powerful enough to rearrange reality around his desires. "What happens now?" I asked softly. "Now you stay here while I handle the situation." His thumb traced along my jawline. and we see if what started between us in Chicago can survive the reality of who I really am. The promise and threat in his words made my pulse race. I was trapped in a penthouse with a man who'd just confessed to being a criminal, whose enemies had apparently targeted me for reasons beyond my control. Every rational instinct screamed that I should demand to leave, should contact the police, should run as far and fast as possible. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, drawn to the contradiction between his gentle caress and the dangerous world he represented. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Good," he said softly. "Fear will keep you alive. But Grace, I need you to understand something. Whatever else happens, whatever you learn about me or my world, you are safe here. No one will hurt you while you're under my protection." The word protection sounded more like ownership, but in that moment, with his hand warm against my face and his eyes dark with promise, I wasn't sure I cared about the distinction. Outside the windows, San Francisco glittered like a jewelry box, beautiful and distant. Inside the penthouse, I was beginning my initiation into a world where love and danger were indistinguishable, where protection came at the cost of freedom, and where walking away might no longer be an option. The first night in Gideon's penthouse, I barely slept. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every sound from the city below reminded me of how isolated I was from my normal life. I lay in the guest bedroom he'd provided, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything that had happened in the span of a few days. By morning, my situation felt surreal. I was essentially being held captive by a man who claimed to be protecting me from threats I couldn't see or understand. Yet the captivity came with Egyptian cotton sheets, a view that belonged on postcards, and room service that arrived without being ordered. Gideon was already awake when I emerged from the bedroom, standing by the wall of monitors with a cup of coffee in his hand. He'd traded his dinner suit for dark jeans and a black sweater that emphasized his lean build. Even in casual clothes, he radiated authority. "Good morning," he said, looking up from what appeared to be security footage. "Did you sleep well?" "Not particularly." I accepted the coffee he offered, noting that it was prepared exactly how I liked it. "Any update on this threat you mentioned?" His expression tightened. "Some progress. My people are working to identify who's behind the surveillance and what they want." "Your people?" "Security specialists. The kind of professionals you need when you operate in my world." He gestured toward the monitors. "They've been reviewing footage from around your apartment building, your workplace, places you frequent. The surveillance has been going on for weeks." Ice flooded my veins. "Weeks? But we only met 3 days ago, which means either this is an extraordinary coincidence or there's something about you that attracted their attention before Chicago." His gray eyes studied my face intently. "Grace, I need you to think carefully. Has anything unusual happened recently? Strange phone calls, the feeling of being watched, people asking questions about you?" I reviewed the past month in my mind, looking for signs I might have missed. Nothing obvious, although. I paused, remembering something that had seemed insignificant at the time. There was a man who came by my office about 2 weeks ago. He said he was from a market research company, asking about my travel patterns and professional relationships. Gideon's expression darkened. What did he look like? Tall, dark hair, expensive suit. He had an accent, maybe Italian or Eastern European. The memory was clearer now that I was focusing on it. He seemed to know a lot about my work with the hotel project, more than he should have from public information. "Did you answer his questions?" "Some of them. He seemed legitimate, and I thought it might lead to new business." Shame heated my cheeks. I told him about my recent travel, mentioned the Chicago trip. Gideon set down his coffee cup with deliberate control. "Grace, that man wasn't from a market research company. He was gathering intelligence about your schedule and connections." The implication hit me like a physical blow. "You think he was working for your enemies?" "I think someone has been planning this for longer than either of us realized." He moved to his phone, speed dialing a number. "Marco, I need you to pull everything from the Harper surveillance. Focus on contacts from 2 weeks ago." "Yes, I'll hold." As he waited for information, I sank onto the sofa, trying to process the idea that I'd been watched and assessed like a target. But why me? I'm nobody special. I don't have money or connections or anything that would make me valuable. You have something more valuable than money, Gideon said, ending his call. You have my attention, and in my world, that makes you precious leverage. The casual way he claimed possession of my attention should have outraged me. Instead, it sent a dangerous thrill through my chest that I tried to suppress. So what happens now? How long do I stay here? Until the threat is neutralized. He sat beside me on the sofa, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Grace, I know this isn't what you wanted, but I need you to understand that keeping you safe is my priority right now, above everything else. Even above your business? Especially above my business. His hand found mine, fingers intertwining with a possessiveness that was becoming familiar. My business will survive, but if something happened to you because of your connection to me, I wouldn't forgive myself. The sincerity in his voice made my throat tight. Gideon, we barely know each other. This level of concern, this intensity, it's not normal. Nothing about my life is normal. His thumb traced across my knuckles. But what I feel for you, that's the most real thing I've experienced in years. Before I could respond, his phone rang. The conversation that followed was in Italian, but I could hear the tension in his voice escalating as he listened to whatever information he was receiving. Understood, he said finally, switching to English. Double the perimeter security, and make sure Elena knows not to come in today. Yes, cancel everything. What is it? I asked as he hung up. The surveillance on you was more extensive than we initially thought. His jaw was tight with controlled anger. They have photos, detailed information about your routines, even recordings of private conversations. Fear spiked through me. What kind of conversations? Phone calls with friends, conversations in restaurants. His eyes met mine, including our dinner last night. The invasion of privacy was staggering. So they know everything we talked about. They know I told you about my family's business. They know you chose to stay despite that information. He stood, pacing to the windows. Which means they'll assume you're more involved than you actually are. Involved in what? My operations, my decisions, my vulnerabilities. He turned back to me, his expression grim. Grace, in their minds you've already crossed the line from innocent bystander to willing participant. The injustice of it made my chest burn with anger. So I'm being punished for having dinner with you? You're being protected from people who don't distinguish between guilt and proximity. His voice softened. I'm sorry. This is my fault for not being more careful, for not realizing how much you'd already come to mean to me. The admission hung between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to examine. What do they want? Money, information. They want me to make mistakes, emotional decisions that compromise my judgment. He moved back to the sofa, sitting closer than before. Having someone I care about makes me vulnerable in ways I haven't been before. So the solution is to keep me locked away indefinitely. The solution is to eliminate the threat permanently. Something cold and dangerous flickered in his eyes. Which is what my people are working on now. I didn't want to ask what eliminating the threat permanently meant in his world. The answer would only confirm what I already suspected about the kind of man I was falling for. In the meantime, he continued, I want you to be comfortable here. Anything you need, anything you want, just ask. What I want is my normal life back. I know. His hand cupped my face, thumb brushing across my cheek. But Grace, I need you to consider the possibility that this might be a better life than the one you're leaving behind. I pulled back, studying his expression. What do you mean? I mean that I can offer you things your normal life never could. Security, luxury, the freedom to pursue whatever interests you without worrying about money or career limitations. His eyes were intense, persuasive. I can give you a life where you never have to struggle again. In exchange for what? In exchange for staying, for becoming part of my world instead of running from it. The offer was tempting in ways I didn't want to admit. My normal life was a constant struggle against deadlines and bills, a series of compromises and disappointments, punctuated by brief moments of satisfaction. What Gideon was describing sounded like a fairy tale. "And the cost?" I asked quietly. "The cost is accepting that your safety will always depend on my power, that the people who care about you will be targets because of their connection to you." His voice was honest, unflinching. "The cost is giving up the illusion of independence in exchange for the reality of protection." Before I could respond, the intercom system chimed. Gideon's posture immediately shifted to high alert as he moved to answer it. "Sir," a voice reported, "we have movement on the perimeter. 3 vehicles, coordinated approach." Gideon's expression hardened into something predatory. "Understood. Initiate lockdown protocols." The lights in the apartment dimmed slightly, and I heard the distinct sound of heavy mechanisms engaging. Security shutters began descending over the windows, transforming the panoramic view into a fortress wall. "What's happening?" I asked, fear making my voice small. "They're making their move." Gideon moved to a wall panel I hadn't noticed before, revealing an array of weapons and communication equipment. "Grace, I need you to go to the bedroom and stay there until I come for you." "I don't want to be alone." "You won't be alone." He handed me a phone. "This connects directly to my security team. If anything happens, if anyone comes through that door who isn't me, you call them immediately." The efficiency with which he armed himself was both impressive and terrifying. This wasn't a man playing at being dangerous. This was someone who'd clearly done this before. "Gideon," I said as he moved toward the door, "what if something happens to you?" He paused, looking back at me with an expression that was both tender and fierce. "Then you'll be taken somewhere safe, and you'll never have to worry about my world again." "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." He crossed back to me, pulling me into his arms with desperate intensity. "Grace, if this goes badly, I need you to know that meeting you has been the best thing that's happened to me in years." Before I could respond, he kissed me. Not the gentle, exploratory kiss from the restaurant, but something hungry and claiming, full of promise and regret. When he pulled away, his eyes were dark with emotion. "Now go," he said softly, "and remember what I said about staying alive." I retreated to the bedroom as ordered, listening to the sounds of preparation in the living area. Voices on radios, the click of weapons being checked, the efficient choreography of people who knew their roles in whatever was about to happen. From the bedroom window, I could see vehicles surrounding the building, dark shapes moving with military precision. Whatever was happening wasn't a negotiation or a business meeting. This was a war, and I was trapped in the middle of it. As I waited in the luxurious bedroom that had become my bunker, I realized that Gideon had been right about one thing. There was no going back to my normal life now, whether I survived the next few hours or not. Grace Harper, the struggling marketing consultant, was gone forever. In her place was someone who'd tasted a world where love and violence danced together, where protection came at the cost of freedom, and where the most dangerous thing wasn't the enemies outside, but the way I was beginning to crave the intoxicating mix of fear and desire that Gideon Castellano represented. The sound of gunfire from somewhere in the building made me close my eyes and pray that whatever happened next, I'd live long enough to discover which version of myself would emerge from the ashes of this night. The gunfire lasted less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. I huddled in the bedroom, clutching the phone Gideon had given me, listening to the sounds of what could only be described as a small war taking place somewhere in the building below. Every shot made me flinch. Every shout from the hallways sent my pulse racing higher. Then, suddenly, silence. I waited, barely breathing, until I heard Gideon's voice in the living area speaking in rapid Italian. Relief flooded through me as I recognized his tone, controlled, authoritative, alive. When he knocked on the bedroom door, I nearly collapsed with gratitude. "It's over," he said, pulling me into his arms as soon as I opened the door. "You're safe." I buried my face against his chest, inhaling his familiar scent mixed with something sharper. Gunpowder, adrenaline, danger. "What happened?" My security team handled the situation. His voice was carefully neutral, but his hands were shaking slightly as they smoothed through my hair. The threat has been neutralized. I pulled back to look at his face, searching for signs of injury. There was a cut above his left eyebrow, and his knuckles were scraped, but he appeared otherwise unharmed. "You're hurt." "Barely." He dismissed the injuries with a wave. "Grace, we need to talk about what happens next." The serious tone in his voice made my stomach clench. "What do you mean?" "I mean that what happened tonight changes everything." He guided me to sit on the edge of the bed, taking my hands in his. "The people who were targeting you, they're not going to simply disappear. This was just the first move in a larger game." "I thought you said the threat was neutralized." "This threat was neutralized. But I have enemies, Grace. And now that they know you matter to me, they'll keep coming." His gray eyes were intense, desperate. "Which means you have two choices." I waited, dreading what he was about to say. "You can disappear. New identity, new life, somewhere they'll never find you." His voice was steady, but I could see the pain the suggestion caused him. "My people can arrange it. Full protection, financial support, everything you need to start over. And the second choice? You stay with me. Permanently." His hands tightened on mine. "You become part of my world completely. Under my protection, but also under my control." The options he presented weren't really choices at all. Exile or captivity, both dressed up in the language of protection and care. "What would staying with you mean exactly?" "It means accepting that your safety is more important than your independence. It means living in secure locations, traveling with security, being watched and protected every moment of every day." He paused, studying my face. "It means becoming my wife." The word hit me like a physical blow. "Your wife?" "Marriage would provide legal protections, make you family in ways that matter in my world." His voice softened. "But more than that, Grace, it would make official what I already feel, that you belong with me." I stared at him, trying to process the magnitude of what he was proposing. "Gideon, we've known each other for less than a week. And in that week, you've become more important to me than anyone has been in my entire life." He brought my hands to his lips, pressing gentle kisses to my knuckles. "I know it's fast. I know it's overwhelming. But my world doesn't allow for slow courtships and gradual commitments. Because of the danger. Because of everything." He stood, pacing to the window where the security shutters were slowly retracting to reveal the dawn sky. "Grace, I need you to understand something about the life I'm offering you. It won't be normal. It won't be safe in the traditional sense. But it will be protected, luxurious, and filled with experiences most people only dream of." "And the cost?" "The cost is trusting me completely, following my lead when it comes to security decisions, accepting that there will be parts of my business you can't know about, can't be involved in." He turned back to me. "The cost is giving up the illusion of independence for the reality of partnership." I thought about my life in San Francisco. The cramped apartment, the constant financial stress, the endless cycle of client meetings and project deadlines. It wasn't a bad life, but it wasn't particularly fulfilling either. What about my career, my work? "You could continue consulting if you wanted to, but you wouldn't need to work for financial reasons." His expression brightened slightly. "Actually, I have several legitimate businesses that could benefit from your expertise. Real opportunities, not make work." "And if I said yes, when would this marriage take place?" "As soon as possible. Today, if you're willing." He returned to sit beside me. "Grace, I'm not just asking you to marry me because of the protection it would provide. I'm asking because I can't imagine my life without you in it." The intensity in his voice made my heart race. "This is insane." "Probably." He smiled, the first genuine expression of humor I'd seen from him since the attack. "But insanity seems to be a theme in my family." Before I could respond, there was a knock at the bedroom door. Gideon's entire posture shifted back to alert wariness. "Come in," he called. A woman entered, tall and elegant with silver-streaked dark hair and the kind of bearing that suggested she was accustomed to authority. She was dressed in an expensive suit, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged in boardrooms and diplomatic functions. "Gideon," she said, her accent clearly Italian. "I came as soon as I heard about the attack. Grace, this is my aunt, Isabella Castellano." Gideon stood, his formality returning. "Isabella, this is Grace Harper." Isabella's dark eyes assessed me with shrewd intelligence. "Ah, the famous Miss Harper. You've caused quite a stir in our family." "I'm sorry, what?" "Word travels quickly in our circles," Isabella explained, moving to sit in the chair across from the bed. "The news that Gideon has found someone worth protecting has been noted." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Isabella, we haven't discussed—" "Oh, but you have discussed it," she interrupted smoothly. "Marriage, protection, bringing her into the family. The walls in this building aren't as soundproof as you think, nephew." Heat flooded my cheeks. "You were listening?" "I was ensuring that my nephew wasn't making decisions that would endanger the family." Isabella's tone was matter-of-fact. "Miss Harper, do you understand what you're being offered?" "I'm beginning to." "Good. Because acceptance means more than just marriage to Gideon. It means marriage into the Castellano family, with all the benefits and obligations that entails." I looked between them, sensing undercurrents I didn't fully understand. "What kind of obligations?" "Loyalty, first and foremost," Isabella replied. "Discretion about family business. Acceptance that the family's interests sometimes supersede individual desires." "Isabella," Gideon warned. "She deserves to know what she's agreeing to." Isabella's gaze never left mine. "Miss Harper, my nephew is offering you a life of luxury and protection. But he's also offering you a life where your choices will be limited, where your safety will always depend on the family's power, where you'll be watched and guarded and managed. Are you trying to talk me out of accepting? I'm trying to ensure you understand the terms." Isabella stood, smoothing her skirt. "Because once you're family, there's no leaving. Ever." The finality in her words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" "She means that the Castellano family takes care of its own," Gideon said, shooting his aunt a warning look. "But family loyalty." "She means that the Castellano family takes care of its own," Gideon said, shooting his aunt a warning look. "But family loyalty is expected to be absolute." Isabella smiled, but there was steel beneath the expression. "Miss Harper, in our world, family members who attempt to leave don't simply walk away to start new lives. They become liabilities that must be managed." The threat was delicately phrased, but unmistakable. I felt the walls of my gilded cage becoming more visible, more confining. "Isabella, that's enough," Gideon said, his voice carrying clear authority. "Is it?" His aunt moved closer to me, her eyes never leaving mine. "Miss Harper, I like you. You have intelligence, courage, and you've clearly captured my nephew's heart in a way I've never seen before. But I need to know that you understand the permanence of what you're considering. I understand that I'm being asked to choose between exile and imprisonment," I said, finding my voice despite the fear. "Neither option seems particularly appealing." Isabella laughed, a genuine sound of appreciation. "Excellent. Honesty is refreshing." She turned to Gideon. "She'll do well, this one, if she survives the transition." "What transition?" "The transformation from Grace Harper, independent consultant, to Grace Castellano, protected family member." Isabella's expression grew serious. "It's not an easy adjustment. The last woman who tried couldn't handle the restrictions." Gideon's expression darkened. "Isabella?" "What happened to her?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "She tried to leave after 6 months of marriage to Gideon's cousin," Isabella replied calmly. "We arranged a very comfortable private facility where she could recover from her nervous breakdown. She's quite content there now." The casual way she described what sounded like imprisonment in a mental institution made my blood run cold. "You had her committed." "We had her cared for," Isabella corrected. "When someone knows our family's secrets and attempts to leave, we ensure they're somewhere safe and supervised." I looked at Gideon, searching his face for contradiction or reassurance. Instead, I saw confirmation of his aunt's words. "Grace," he said softly, "I would never let that happen to you. But Isabella is right that you need to understand the reality of what you're choosing. The reality is that once I say yes, I can never say no again. The reality is that once you're family, you're protected and provided for beyond anything you can imagine. Isabella's tone became almost maternal. Miss Harper, I've watched my nephew for 30 years. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. What he's offering isn't just marriage. It's devotion from one of the most powerful men in the country. Devotion with conditions. All devotion has conditions, Gideon said, moving to sit beside me again. Grace, I won't lie to you about the restrictions. But I also won't minimize the benefits. You'd have access to anything you wanted, the freedom to pursue any interests that didn't compromise security, and the knowledge that you'd never have to worry about money or safety again. And children? The question escaped before I could stop it. Something shifted in his expression, becoming tender and possessive. Children would be protected even more carefully than you are. They'd want for nothing and have every advantage. But they'd also be Castellanos, Isabella added, with all that entails. The thought of bringing children into this world of violence and control made my chest tight. But there was another part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, that was drawn to the idea of children who would be powerful and protected, who would never know the financial struggles and insecurities that had defined my own childhood. I need time to think, I said finally. Of course. Gideon's hand found mine. But Grace, I need you to know that time is a luxury we don't have much of. My enemies won't wait for you to make a decision. How long? Tonight, tomorrow at the latest. His expression was apologetic, but firm. After what happened here, staying in limbo isn't safe for any of us. Isabella stood, smoothing her suit jacket. I'll leave you to discuss this privately. But Miss Harper, remember that fear is often the enemy of good judgment. What seems overwhelming now may prove to be the greatest opportunity of your life. After she left, Gideon and I sat in silence for several minutes. I could feel him watching me, gauging my reaction to everything that had been revealed. Your aunt is terrifying, I said finally. Isabella has been protecting this family for 40 years, he replied. She's had to make difficult decisions, but everything she does is motivated by love and loyalty. Including having people committed to mental institutions? Including ensuring that family secrets remain within the family. His voice was steady, unapologetic. Grace, I won't pretend my world is gentle or forgiving. But I will promise that as my wife, you'd be cherished and protected beyond measure. I stood, pacing to the window where the morning sun was painting the San Francisco skyline in shades of gold and pink. My normal life was out there somewhere, waiting for me to return to deadlines and client meetings and the constant struggle to make ends meet. But that life also meant being alone, vulnerable, constantly looking over my shoulder for threats I couldn't identify or understand. If I say yes, I began slowly, what would the actual wedding be like? Small, private, immediate. Gideon joined me at the window. A judge who owes the family favors, a few witnesses, legal documentation that would make you family in every sense that matters. And then we figure out how to build a life together. His arm encircled my waist, pulling me back against his chest. Grace, I know this isn't the romantic proposal you probably dreamed of, but what I'm offering you is real partnership, real protection, and a love that will never waver. I leaned into his warmth, feeling the solid strength of him behind me. And if I can't adjust, if I can't handle the restrictions and the constant surveillance, then we'll work together to find ways to make it bearable. His lips brushed against my ear. But Grace, I have faith in you. You're stronger than you realize, more adaptable than you know. How can you be so certain? Because you're still here. After everything you've learned, after all the warnings and threats, you're still considering staying. His arms tightened around me. That tells me you're already halfway to accepting what you want, even if you're not ready to admit it. He was right, and that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Despite everything rational telling me to run, I was drawn to the intensity of what he offered, to the promise of never being alone or vulnerable again. "There's something else you need to know," Gideon said, his voice becoming more serious. "About why my enemies targeted you specifically." I turned in his arms to face him. "What do you mean?" "The surveillance, the research into your background, it wasn't random." His expression was troubled. "Grace, your father's business partner, the one who disappeared with the company funds when you were in college." My blood chilled. "Richard Moss. What about him?" "He didn't just steal from your father's company. He was laundering money for a rival family, using the legitimate business as a front." Gideon's eyes were gentle but unflinching. "When he disappeared, he took information that damaged several operations, information that led to arrests and prosecutions." "You're saying my father was involved in—" "Your father was innocent, but his business partner's betrayal put your family on a list of people connected to that operation." Gideon's hands cupped my face. "Grace, you were already on their radar because of your father's unwitting involvement. Meeting me just moved you up the priority list." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My father's business failure, our family's financial ruin, the shame and struggle that had defined my adult life, all of it connected to the criminal world I was now being drawn into. "So this was never really about chance or choice," I said quietly. "I was already trapped in your world before I ever met you. You were already at risk. But Grace, what I'm offering you is the chance to be protected instead of targeted, powerful instead of vulnerable." His thumbs brushed away tears I didn't realize I'd shed. "Your connection to this world was established years ago. The only question now is whether you'll face it alone or with the full power of the Castellano family behind you." Standing there in his arms, looking out at a city that suddenly seemed full of hidden dangers and invisible enemies, I realized that my choice had been made the moment I'd accepted his dinner invitation in Chicago. Maybe even the moment I'd looked into his storm-gray eyes in that airport terminal. "Ask me again," I said softly. "Grace Harper," he said, his voice formal and reverent. "Will you marry me? Will you become my wife, my partner, my family?" I thought about my cramped apartment, my maxed-out credit cards, my lonely nights and uncertain future. I thought about Isabella's warnings and the gun battle that had raged below us just hours ago. I thought about the man whose business partner had destroyed my family's life, and the enemies who were already hunting me regardless of my choices. And I thought about the way Gideon looked at me like I was precious, the way he'd risked his own safety to protect mine, the promise of never being alone or afraid again. "Yes," I said, sealing my fate with a single word. "Yes, I'll marry you." The relief and joy that flooded his expression was worth every risk I was taking. When he kissed me, it tasted like promises and possession, like the beginning of something beautiful and dangerous. By evening, I would be Grace Castellano, protected and cherished and trapped forever in a world of shadows and gold. And as terrifying as that future was, I couldn't bring myself to regret the choice. The cage might be gilded, but for the first time in my life, I would never be alone inside it. The wedding took place 6 hours later in Isabella's private study, a room filled with antique furniture and oil paintings of stern-faced Castellano ancestors. The judge who performed the ceremony was clearly nervous, his hands shaking slightly as he read the vows, but he completed the legal requirements with professional efficiency. I wore a cream silk dress that had appeared in my size within an hour of my acceptance. Another demonstration of the Castellano family's resources and reach. Gideon stood beside me in a charcoal suit, his hand steady and warm as he slipped a platinum wedding band onto my finger, a perfect match to the engagement ring I'd never actually received. The ceremony was surreal in its simplicity. No flowers, no music, no gathered friends or family, just legal words spoken in a room heavy with the weight of family history and the smell of leather-bound books. When the judge pronounced us husband and wife, Gideon's kiss was gentle but claiming, a reminder that I now belonged to him in ways that went far beyond romantic love. "Welcome to the family, Grace," Isabella said afterward, embracing me with what seemed like genuine warmth. "You're a Castellano now. That name will protect you, but it also binds you to all of us." The small reception that followed felt more like a business meeting than a celebration. Several men in expensive suits appeared to offer congratulations, their eyes assessing me with the same attention they might give to a new business acquisition. I was introduced as Gideon's wife, rather than by name, and I noticed how each man's demeanor toward me shifted from polite indifference to respectful deference once my new status was established. "They're evaluating whether you'll be an asset or a liability," Gideon murmured in my ear as we moved through the small crowd. "You're handling it perfectly." "I feel like I'm being inspected," I whispered back. "You are. But Grace, you need to understand. These men control territories across 3 states. Their approval of our marriage means acceptance into a network of protection and power that extends far beyond what I can provide alone." The weight of what he was saying settled over me as I shook hands and exchanged pleasantries with men whose names I recognized from newspaper headlines about organized crime investigations. I was no longer just married to Gideon. I was connected to an entire network of families whose business dealings existed in the shadows between legal and illegal. As the evening progressed, I began to understand the true scope of what I'd married into. These weren't just wealthy businessmen with questionable ethics. These were the modern inheritors of a system that had operated for generations, with its own codes of honor, its own justice, and its own brutal consequences for betrayal. "Mrs. Castellano," one of the older men said, approaching me as Gideon was pulled into a conversation across the room. "I knew your husband's father. Giovanni was a good man, but perhaps too gentle for the life he inherited." "I wouldn't know," I replied carefully. "Gideon doesn't talk much about his father." "No, he wouldn't." The man's eyes were sharp, calculating. "But you should know that Gideon is nothing like his father. He has the strength to do what's necessary, even when it's unpleasant." The words carried weight I didn't fully understand, but the man's expression made it clear he was delivering a message rather than making casual conversation. When Gideon returned to my side, his hand immediately found the small of my back, a possessive gesture that had become familiar. "What did Franco want?" he asked quietly. "To tell me that you're stronger than your father was." I studied his face, looking for a reaction. What did he mean by that? Gideon's expression hardened, almost imperceptibly. He meant that leadership sometimes requires making choices that gentler men can't make. "What kind of choices?" "The kind we won't discuss tonight." His tone made it clear the subject was closed. "Grace, there are parts of this life that I'll always shield you from. Trust me when I say that's for your own protection as much as your peace of mind." By 10 o'clock, the last of the guests had departed, leaving just family members in Isabella's study. The atmosphere relaxed slightly, but I could still feel the weight of assessment from Gideon's relatives. "So," said a younger man who'd been introduced as Gideon's cousin Marco, "what do you think of your new family, Grace?" "I think I have a lot to learn," I replied honestly. "That's a diplomatic answer," observed a woman named Sophia, Marco's wife. "But diplomacy will only get you so far in this family. Eventually, you'll need to choose sides." "Sophia," Gideon warned. "What?" She should understand the dynamics. Sophia's smile was sharp. "Grace, every family has politics. Ours just happen to have higher stakes than most." Isabella intervened before the conversation could become more pointed. "Enough. Grace has had an overwhelming day. Let her adjust before you start recruiting her for your various causes." As we prepared to leave for what Gideon had described as our honeymoon suite, another secure penthouse across the city, Isabella pulled me aside. "A word of advice," she said quietly. "In this family, information is currency, and secrets are power. Be very careful what you reveal about yourself, your thoughts, and your loyalties. Not everyone who smiles at you has your best interests at heart." "Including you?" She laughed, a genuine sound of appreciation. "Especially me. But Grace, I do want you to succeed. Gideon needs someone strong enough to be a true partner, not just a beautiful accessory. I think you might be that person. And if I'm not, then you'll find yourself very lonely in a very luxurious prison." Her expression was matter of fact, "But I have faith in you. You've already proven you can adapt to extraordinary circumstances." The ride to our new home was quiet, both of us absorbed in the magnitude of what had just occurred. I stared at the wedding ring on my finger, the physical proof that my old life was officially over. "Regrets?" Gideon asked as we entered the penthouse that would serve as our first home together. Ask me in a year, I replied, trying to inject some humor into the moment. I will. He pulled me into his arms, his expression serious. Grace, I know this day has been overwhelming, but I want you to know that everything I promised you is real. You'll be protected, cherished, provided for. Whatever challenges come, we'll face them together. And the parts of your business you won't tell me about will remain separate from our personal life. His hands framed my face. My love, there are things in my world that would change how you see me, how you see yourself. I want to preserve your ability to be happy, to find joy in the life we're building. By keeping me ignorant, by keeping you innocent. His thumb brushed across my lower lip. Grace, trust me when I say that some knowledge is a burden you don't want to carry. I could have pressed, could have demanded more honesty about what I was now connected to. But standing there in his arms, seeing the love and protectiveness in his eyes, I chose to accept the boundaries he was setting. Perhaps ignorance wasn't such a terrible price to pay for security and devotion. Okay, I said softly. I trust you. The relief in his expression was profound. Thank you. That means everything to me. What followed was our true first night together as husband and wife, passionate and tender and claiming in ways that made my new status feel real in my body as well as my mind. When I fell asleep in his arms, surrounded by luxury I could never have imagined affording, protected by power I was only beginning to understand, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete security. But even in sleep, part of me remained alert to the sounds of the city beyond our windows, to the subtle electronic hums that indicated security systems monitoring our safety, to the weight of the wedding ring that marked me as Gideon Castellano's wife and all that entailed. The next morning brought the first test of my new reality. I woke to find Gideon already dressed for business, his expression tense as he spoke quietly into his phone. What is it? I asked when he ended the call. A problem that requires my immediate attention. He moved to the closet, returning with a small, elegant pistol. Grace, I need you to stay here today. Don't leave the apartment for any reason. Fear spiked through me. Is it connected to yesterday? To our wedding? Possibly. There are always ripple effects when power structures shift. He checked the weapon with practiced efficiency before concealing it beneath his jacket. My marriage to you sends a message about my priorities and vulnerabilities. Some people will want to test that. Test it how? By seeing if my concern for your safety makes me weak or more dangerous. His expression was grim. Today, they'll get their answer. He kissed me goodbye, a kiss that felt like both promise and farewell. After he left, I explored our new home more thoroughly, noting the reinforced windows, the multiple escape routes, the communication equipment hidden throughout the apartment. This wasn't just a luxury residence. It was a fortress designed to protect its occupants from threats both known and unknown. Around noon, I received a call from Isabella. Grace, dear, how are you settling in? Fine, though Gideon had to leave on business. He seemed concerned about something. Yes, I'm aware of the situation. That's actually why I'm calling. Isabella's tone was carefully neutral. There may be some unpleasant news reports today. I wanted you to hear the truth from family before you saw the sensationalized versions. My stomach clenched. What kind of news reports? The kind that remind the city why crossing the Castellano family has consequences. Isabella paused. Grace, your husband is protecting something precious. You. That protection sometimes requires demonstrations of power that may be difficult for you to reconcile with the man you love. What did he do? What was necessary? Nothing more, nothing less. Isabella's voice was firm. And Grace, whatever you see or hear today, remember that every action was taken to ensure your safety and send a clear message that threatening you is not acceptable. The call ended, leaving me alone with my fear and imagination. When the news alerts began appearing on my phone an hour later, I understood what Isabella had been preparing me for. 3 men had been found dead in a warehouse across the city, their bodies arranged in a way that law enforcement sources described as sending a message. The victims were known associates of the rival family that had been targeting me. The killings were professional, efficient, and clearly the work of someone with extensive experience in violence. As I read the details, I thought about Gideon's gentle hands on my face, his tender words, his promises of love and protection. The same hands that had held me so carefully had likely orchestrated the deaths of 3 men before breakfast. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. The man I'd married was capable of both overwhelming tenderness and calculated brutality, sometimes within the same day. When he returned that evening, I searched his face for signs of what he'd done, what he'd ordered, what kind of man I'd bound my life to. He looked tired but satisfied, like someone who'd completed an unpleasant but necessary task. "Did you see the news?" he asked, pouring himself a drink. "Yes." "And?" I studied his expression, looking for remorse or satisfaction or any emotion that would help me understand how to feel about what had happened. "Isabella said you did what was necessary to protect me." "I did." His voice was matter of fact. "Grace, those men were planning to kidnap you, to use you against me. They had detailed plans, equipment, safe houses prepared. They weren't going to stop until someone stopped them. So you killed them." "I had them killed," he corrected. "There's a difference. I wasn't sure there was, from a moral standpoint, but I was beginning to understand that morality in Gideon's world operated by different rules than the ones I'd grown up with. "How do you live with it?" I asked quietly. "How do you reconcile being gentle with me and violent with others?" "Because the gentleness and the violence serve the same purpose," he replied, moving to stand beside me. "Protecting what I love. Grace, I would burn down the entire city if it meant keeping you safe. That's not a threat or hyperbole. That's a promise." The intensity in his voice made my breath catch. This was what I'd married. Absolute devotion, backed by absolute power, and the willingness to use both, without hesitation. "I need time to process this," I said finally. "Of course. But Grace, while you're processing, remember that those men are dead instead of you. Remember that their plans involved pain and terror and using your suffering to control me." His hand cupped my cheek. "Whatever moral complexity you're struggling with, the alternative was much worse." That night, as I lay beside my husband in our fortress-like home, I tried to reconcile the man who whispered endearments against my skin with the one who'd ordered executions to protect me. The contradiction was jarring, but gradually, I began to understand that there was no contradiction at all. Gideon Castellano was exactly what he'd always claimed to be, a man who protected what was his with every resource at his disposal. The fact that those resources included violence didn't diminish his love. It emphasized the lengths he would go to preserve it. As I drifted toward sleep, I realized that my transformation was complete. Grace Harper, independent consultant, would have been horrified by the events of the day. But Grace Castellano, protected wife of a powerful man, felt only gratitude that the threat had been eliminated so efficiently. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it brought a strange sense of peace. I was no longer the woman who'd fallen asleep in airport chairs, worried about rent and medical bills, and an uncertain future. I was now someone whose safety was guaranteed by power most people could only imagine, whose comfort was ensured by resources beyond measure, whose love was protected by a man who would literally kill to keep her safe. The price of that transformation was accepting that love and violence could coexist, that protection often required brutality, and that the most dangerous men could also be the most devoted husbands. As Gideon's arm tightened around me in sleep, I closed my eyes and let myself sink into the certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow brought, I would never face them alone again. The cage was golden, the protection was absolute, and the love was worth every moral compromise I'd had to make to claim it. Outside our windows, the city continued its life, unaware that Grace Harper had disappeared forever, replaced by someone stronger, more protected, and infinitely more dangerous to cross. Mrs. Grace Castellano slept peacefully in her fortress, dreaming of storm-gray eyes and promises kept in blood.